13. The minor sort of seers prognosticate many future events only for a month's space, from the shoulder bone of a sheep on which the knife never came, for as before it is said, and the Nazarists of old had something of it, iron hinders all of the operations of those that travel in the intrigues in these hidden dominions. By looking into the bone, they will tell if whoredom is committed by the owner's wife, what money the master of the sheep had, if any will die out of the house for that month, and if any cattle there will take as a planet struck. Then they will prescribe a preservative and prevention. 14. A woman, it seems one exception from the general rule, singularly wife of these matters is Foresight, living in a Connacht and rife with the Herbites in the time of mischief of Montrose, his wars with the states of Scotland, being notorious among many, and so examined by some that violently seized that isle, if she saw them coming or not. She said she saw them coming many hours before they came in view of the isle. But earnestly looking, she sometimes took to them for enemies, sometimes for friends, and moreover they looked as if they went from the isle, not as men approaching it, which made her not put the inhabitants on their guard. The matter was that the barge wherein the enemy sailed was a little before taken in the inhabitants of the little same of the isle, and the men had their backs towards the isle when they were plying the oars towards it. Thus this old scout and Delphian oracle was at the least deceived, and did not deceive. Being asked who gave her such sights and warnings, she said that as soon as she set 3 crosses of straw upon the palm of her hand, a great ugly beast sprang out of the earth near her and flew in the air. If what she inquired had success according to her wish, the beast would descend calmly and lick up the crosses. If it would not succeed, the beast would furiously thrust her and the crosses over on the ground, and so vanish in his place. 15. Among other instances of undoubted verity, proving that these, being of such aerial peoples and species of creatures not vulgarly known, I add the subsequent relation some whereof I have from my acquaintance with the actors and patients of the rest of the eyewitnesses to the matter of fact. The first whereof shall be of the woman taken out of her childbed, and having a lingering image of her substituted body in her room, which resembles decayed and died, and was buried. But the person stolen returning to her husband after 2 years' space, being convinced by many undeniable tokens that she was his former wife, admitted her home, and had divers children with her. Among other reports she gave her husband, this was one, that she perceived little what they did in the spacious house she lodged in, until she anointed one of her eyes with a certain unction that was by her, which they perceiving to have acquainted her with her actions, they feigned her blind in that eye with a puff of their breath. She found the place full of light, without any fountain or lamp from whence it did spring. The person lived in the country next to that of my last residence, and might furnish matter of dispute amongst the cautious, whether if her husband had been married in the interim of her 2 years' absence, he was obliged to divorce from a second spouse at the return of the first. There is an air appearing without superstition for recovering of such that are stolen, but think it superfluous to insert it. I saw a woman of 40 years of age, and examined her, having another clergyman in my company, about the report that passed her long hair fasting. Her name is not in here. It was told by them that the house, as well as herself, that she took very little or no food for several years past, that she tarried in the fields overnight, saw and conversed with a people she knew not, having wandered in seeking of her sheep, and slept upon a hillock, and finding herself transported to another place before day. The woman had a child since that time, and is still pretty melancholious and silent, hardly ever seen to laugh. where natural heat and radical moisture seem to be equally balanced, like an unextinguished lamp, and going in a circle not unlike to the faint life of bees and some sort of birds that sleep all the winter over and revive in the spring. It is usual in all magical arts to have candidates proficient in a belief of their tutor's skill and ability to perform their feats and act their juggling pranks and letterman. But a person called Stuart, possessed with a prejudice at that spoken of the second sight, and living near my house, was foe to it by Seer, before many witnesses that he lost his speech and power of his legs, and breathing excessively, as if expiring, because of the many fearful lights that appeared to him. The company were forced to carry him into the house. It is notoriously known what in Killen within Perthshire fell tragically out with a yeoman that lived hard by, who coming to a company within an alehouse, where Seer sat at table, and at the sight of the entranced neighbor, the Seer, starting, rose to go out of the house, and asked the reason of his haste, told that the entrant man should die within 2 days, at which news the named instant flabbed the Seer, and was himself executed 2 days after for the fact. A minister, very intelligent but misbelieving in such sights, were not all ordinary, chancing to be in the narrow lane with a Seer, who, perceiving a wight of a known visage, surfacely to encounter them, the Seer designed the minister to turn out of the way, who, scorning his reason, and holding himself in the path of them, when the Seer was going hastily out of the way, they were both violently cast aside to a good distance, and the fall made them lame for all their life. A little after, the minister was carried home. One came to toll the bell for the death of the man whose representation met them in the narrow path some half an hour before. Another example is, a Seer in Kentry of Scotland, sitting at the table with divers others, suddenly did cast his head aside. The company asking him why he did it, he answered that such a friend of his by name, then in Ireland, threatened immediately to cast a dishful of butter at his face. The men wrote down the day and hour, and sent to the gentleman to know the truth, which deed the gentleman declared he did that very time, for he knew that his friend was a Seer, and would make sport with it. The men that were present examined the matter exactly, and told me the story, and withal, the Seer object with his optics perceived no other object so readily as this, at such a distance.